All right, welcome to this presentation on what addiction science teaches all of us about how to have the most fulfilling life possible. My name is Jeff Lerner. I'm the founder and CEO of ENTRE, and we're a company that is focused on helping people have the most fulfilling life possible. So I wanted to present this. This presentation is sort of part of our philosophy on fulfillment and some of the foundational logic behind our methods. But I thought it could be really beneficial for everyone. So I wanted to record it and put it out on YouTube. As a starting point, if we're going to talk about a fulfilling life, it probably begs this question: what is fulfillment? So we kind of have two different angles that we try to approach our study and our understanding of fulfillment from. One is what we call the teleological angle, and the other is the etiological angle. So I will briefly read this. Teleology is the study of the inherent purpose or goal of things based on their design. So the idea here is that you can extrapolate the intention of whoever or whatever designed us as living creatures. You can extrapolate the intention by studying our design. And the idea of fulfillment is essentially that if we're designed a certain way, then if we fulfill the intention of our design, we will experience this feeling of fulfillment. Kind of stands to reason. The classic example of teleology is a fork and a spoon. It's very clear from the design of these two utensils that they are intended for different things, and fulfillment of their intention will come from using them in the way that they're designed. If you're trying to, sip broth with a fork, you are not in sync with the design of the fork, right? And so thus you're not fulfilling the design of the fork. So as human beings, if we can understand the intention by learning as much as possible about our design, or as it says here, looked at from this angle, fulfillment comes from living our life in alignment with everything we can observe about how we are designed as physical, emotional, relational, intellectual, and spiritual beings. And each of those dimensions of designedness is a different set of sciences and inquiry, sort of disciplines. But if we sort of observe everything we can extrapolate the intention based on learning as much as we can about our design. And the strategy of this approach is to learn as much as we can from observation about human fulfillment, and then design our life to match. So at ENTRE, we talk a lot, our whole methodology is called life design, and really it comes down to designing our life to align with the design of the living. We are the living organism, and if we can design our life to align with the intention that's expressed and observable through our design, then we'll live a fulfilled life, right? That's kind of the basic premise. Now, there's a different angle called the etiological angle. So etiology is about extrapolating design from intention, which means you actually delve into the intention, everything you can sort of learn or theorize about the origin or the intention of the creation of life. And then from that, you kind of extract the optimal design for the life of the lived, created being, right? Etiology is the study of causes or origins. And looked at from this angle, fulfillment comes from inquiry into fundamental questions about the origin of human life and the intention of any non-human creative force that played a part in human life coming to be. So where would we go for that inquiry, right? Fortunately, human beings have been doing this inquiry as long as we have recorded records. Philosophy, hard sciences, soft sciences, spiritual traditions and practices, anything in kind of the metaphysical realm. And overall, the strategy of this approach is to learn as much as we can from observation about the origins of human life and society, because there is no human life without social life. Humans are intrinsically social creatures that can't survive without others. But we study that, and then we extract from that theories and frameworks on how to design our life to match. So those are the two different angles that at ENTRE we apply ourselves rigorously to this, to try to maximize our understanding of human fulfillment, and then be able to develop, systems and prescriptions and whatnot for the average person, for you, for me, for all of us to live more fulfilled lives. Like I said, that is in a nutshell what ENTRE does. We're engaged in an effort to become the foremost knowledge center on the subject of human fulfillment, and design systems and frameworks we can apply to our lives to make them more fulfilled. So we start by looking at what are, and this is just based on research data widely available, what are the top factors that people report as corresponding to fulfillment in their lives. And admittedly, the word fulfillment means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. We'll talk a little bit more specifically about what we mean by the term, but it's kind of one of those things like maybe everybody defines it a little differently, but we all kind of know it when we see it. And so based on some generally agreed upon definition of fulfillment, what are the top 6 factors that contribute to it? And this is what they are. So we see first social connections. It stands to reason, given that human beings, like our adaptive survival, and not just survival trait, but our adaptive trait that allowed us to thrive was really how we started to form teams and tribes and operating groups. That's what allowed us to overcome a lot of inherent physical limitations and become the dominant species on the planet. It was really social connection. So it stands to reason that given that was a critical evolutionary trait for us to emerge as we are, that again, to the teleological argument that you can see, and the etiological argument, actually, it kind of corresponds to both, that you can see that those traits that support life are going to be those traits that are designed to produce feelings of fulfillment. So not surprisingly, the number one trait that ultimately allowed humans to emerge and stay alive, which was our working together socially, is also the number one factor that produces self-reported feelings of fulfillment. And then right below that, social contribution. And these are actually pretty close to neck and neck in terms of being the top spot, where social contribution is not just this idea that I have connectedness or relationships with others, but actually that there seems to be this intrinsic reward, a sensational, almost somatic reward in the body when I do things that I know are contributing to the well-being of others. I mean, that right there speaks to the inherent social and almost the charitable or altruistic aspect of design. We're designed to be in service to each other, not just connected to each other, but contributing to and in service to each other. And that is also why we see job satisfaction, right? The fact that we have to do a job is not inherently fulfilling. That's just the nature of living in a world with finite resources where we have to, acquire things in order to survive, and we have to work and create value so that the recipients of that value will exchange with us what we need to survive, because no one of us is capable of producing everything that we need to survive. This is why it was, we were, as a species, were forced into social relationships. But then when you see job satisfaction and you say, okay, well, what does that actually mean, job satisfaction? It means it's not enough to just do work. There's 2 aspects of job satisfaction. There's the contribution aspect of the job. Am I doing work that benefits others? But also, am I doing work that aligns with who I am as an individual? So there's something inherent in our design that is not only about service to others, and it's not only about being productive and doing work in the first place, but also about doing things that are in alignment with who we authentically know ourselves to be. So there's this aspect of self-discovery and self-expression, and aligning that with our productive requirements and our design to serve others, and we align all that and we feel fulfilled, right? And then marital status, I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, there are movements that want to dispute this, but the reality is there appears to be something inherent in our design that is about monogamous coupling in a committed, sort of contractual, long-term sense. And there's all kinds of practical reasons. 1 + 1 is greater than 2 in the context of a marriage. 2 people who decide to align their lives and focus on building something together can accomplish more than each individual would individually added together. It's kind of the analogy of the draft horses that pull, you've seen those big, strong horses that pull carts. One draft horse can pull 8,000 pounds. And obviously, another draft horse can pull 8,000 pounds, but when you put 2 draft horses together, they can actually pull 24,000 pounds, which is 3 times as much, not just twice as much. That's kind of the same concept of marriage. There's just a huge kind of survival and productive benefit to aligning with people. And so not surprisingly, we're wired to feel more fulfilled when we do. Faith affiliation, again, maybe not everyone's most popular thing to hear or talk about, but it is actually statistically proven that people, it's not just I claim to be affiliated with a faith practice. It's actually I express that affiliation through some sort of ritualized attendance or performance of a worship or a celebration or a gathering. It's basically people who go to some sort of service on a regular basis are more fulfilled than people who don't. So there's clearly something in our fulfillment design or in our design that produces feelings of fulfillment when we acknowledge and develop some sort of relationship with our sense of createdness or higher power or whatever else might be out there, the supernatural, so to speak. And then level of income, still a factor, but maybe not nearly as high as we might expect. Frankly, if we like our job, it has a lot more to do with how fulfilled we are than how much money we earn. And the other thing I'll say about level of income is that it's not so much about the number, it's all contextual. It's actually about the amount of options and the amount of choices that number produces for me in my life. So if I make $200,000 a year, but I live in, Boston and have a family of 6 and I'm the sole breadwinner, I don't actually have really any more choices in my life than I would if I maybe made $50,000 a year with no kids living in Kansas, right? So it's not about the level of income per se, it's about the amount of options that level of income affords us. Now, if I'm making $200,000 a year with no kids living in Kansas, then I have sort of 4 times as much money to go around in my life as the guy making 50. I'm going to have more fulfillment because I have more options, more choices, more things I can do to express myself and to align with who I understand myself to be, and to create experiences in my life that allow me to explore and discover who I truly am. So these are the factors in fulfillment, and these to me are hugely instructive for us in understanding our intrinsic design. We're designed for social connection. We're designed to be in service to each other. We're designed to align our individualism with our productivity, with our service to others. We're designed to be in long-term monogamous couplings. We're designed to have a relationship with the supernatural or whatever our sense is of whatever created us. And we are designed to express ourselves through choices and options that money can afford us. So if we really dig a little deeper into this word fulfillment, it's actually a very interesting word. It's a paradox. So the word fulfillment implies completion. It comes from the Old English word fulfillon, which means literally to fill full. And in later usage, it came also to connote some sort of mission or specifically prophecy or destiny. Like during the Middle Ages, there was a very supernatural component to this idea of fulfillment that we're all predestined to do something and we're meant to fulfill that. But that is really true to the essence of the word, this idea that it simultaneously implies that we fulfilled our mission, calling, or purpose. In other words, we did something satisfactorily. But also there's a sense of completeness to it. That's why it's a paradox, right? Because it's what do we do when we're filling something, when we're pouring something, we're filling it full. Once it's full, what do? We stop pouring. So the idea of fulfillment implies that the thing is done and we can stop, right? And because when it's full, we stop pouring, right? But when we stop doing, what is it when we stop doing? There, I just stopped doing for a second. What was left? I'm just being here, right? I'm not doing. I mean, I guess I'm standing, but to the extent that I was talking and moving my hands and now I've stopped, I'm just being still, right? So when we stop doing, what's left is being. We're going to come back to this, doing and being. It's all about doing and being, right? Fulfillment then is a state of being that reflects a satisfactory completion of doing. In other words, nobody would say that I do fulfilled. They would say, I am fulfilled. Fulfillment is a state of being. It's a to be verb. I am. I be fulfilled. It's not I do fulfilled, right? I am is obviously to be. But that's not to say that once we feel fulfilled, we stop doing. We can look at the human condition and see that we are not designed to stop doing. That's not what fulfillment's about. Fulfillment is not about reaching some Zen state where we do nothing. Given that all 6 of the top fulfillment factors involve interaction with others, we clearly are not designed to stop doing. Social connection is something we do. Social contribution is something we do. A job is something we do. Marriage is something we do, right? We're not meant to stop doing. In fact, the stoppage of doing correlates with early death as shown by data on people who retire and stop working. Now, retirement per se doesn't actually increase mortality. But what people choose to do in retirement, it's actually people who stop challenging themselves physically and cognitively die much faster than those who don't. So by all means, we are not meant to stop doing. So what exactly am I saying? Well, let's dig in a little bit on this relationship between being and doing. And let's look at the impulse to do, right? Remember, this is a conversation about what addiction science can teach us about fulfillment for all of us. In addiction, certainly it's doing things. It's doing drugs. It's doing porn. It's doing work. It's doing too much eating. It's an excess of doing is what addiction is, right? So let's look at this relationship between being and doing. So there's two aspects to our doing. Call it a yin and a yang, or a positive and a negative. So first, we're born, we come to be, right? Our ourness is our beingness. And then we do, because growing up means becoming productive. At some point, every human is enrolled in this idea. We're part of a social fabric, and we're expected to do work, to do our part to support life, both individually, we have to do stuff to keep ourselves alive, and collectively, we're expected to do stuff to contribute to society and the function that keeps everybody else, the functions that keep everybody alive, right? So in other words, we're expected to do work, i.e. doing, to support our being. And we start taking initiative around age 3 as preparation to belong in society, and then it just grows from there. So in this very real sense, we do to support being, right? So then what's the flip side of that? So pain activates doing. There's a negative aspect to doing too, where growing up means experiencing pain. Just being alive means experiencing pain, right? And then often as we grow up and we start to develop the ability, awareness, and the ability to understand and try to comprehend what's happening to us, but we don't have the tools to process things that are painful, especially at younger ages, and to emerge from it completely psychologically unharmed and unscarred. And so one of the reasons we also start doing at a young age, we start taking initiative around age 3, as we start to experience discomfort and disapproval around simply being, i.e. the idea of not doing. Potty training is often the first instance of this. Think about what potty training is. Prior to this expectation being placed upon us that if we have to do that thing, we're expected to like do a preceding thing of like getting up and walking to a porcelain chair and sitting down in a certain body position and doing that thing. Prior to that, it was just part of being. Little 1-year-old Jeff was just being in piss or being in poop or whatever, right? And then there becomes a point where it's not okay to just be anymore. Hey, if you're gonna pee, we need you to do something. We need you to go to the bathroom, right? And that's kind of some of us, our first experience. Even prior to that, there's kind of this like, I'm hungry. Oh, well, if you're hungry, you're gonna have to, extend your arm and feed yourself, right? So we start to do things, not just to support being, like maybe feeding ourselves, but also to avoid being, like the shame or the judgment or the punishment or the criticism or the sense of disconnection that comes from not doing things that we're expected to do because we reach an age where it's no longer acceptable to just be, right? So we do to support being, and we also do to avoid being. And that duality, that dichotomy starts to emerge in an extremely young age. Now, obviously, as kids, we're not aware of this. We're not saying like, okay, being is a little bit discomfortable, so I'm going to go do something to avoid the discomfort of being, but also I know that I need to do these things to support my being. Like, we're not thinking about any of this, but little do we realize that the impulse to do has both a positive and a negative origination. And this also corresponds to this idea that like everything we do is either in pursuit of pleasure or avoidance of pain. Kind of another way of saying the same thing, because we tend to experience pleasure from those things, at least short term, that support life, right? So if we take all of that and we say, okay, let me try to understand all of my doing. Because frankly, for most of us, that's what our life is. Now there's this underlying being that we can talk about and we can go deep on. That's what the world of woo-woo is, as they say, is sort of like, a focus on being, right? But for most of us, the reality is all above the line. It's just doing, doing, doing. So let's look at our doing, and we have a concept that we call the Doing Cascade. So what this visualizes is that basically there's 5 types of things that we do. There's work that we do that is essentially our required productive contribution, both in order to get things we need to live and also to give and earn our right to exist and be supported by a society. There are things. Now, it's really about the acquisition of things. The blue rectangle really represents the doing of things to acquire things. You might say, like, going to the hardware store to buy a hammer is a thing, a doing of a thing to get a thing. Relationships, obviously we do relationships. We have all kinds of relationships. Substances, that's basically anything that we ingest or inject. And then activities would essentially be all the other things that we do that aren't specifically around acquisition of things. They're more just things that we do for recreation or whatever other reason. And any of those things that we do exists or can be done across a spectrum, or what we call a cascade, of the underlying reasoning for doing the thing. So the first line, or the lowest level, is that we do things that support life or being. And for purposes of this, we're going to use being and life sort of synonymously. We do things to support our being. We go to work so we can support our being and and put shelter over our head. We have a relationship because we feel lonely and we feel existentially empty. And like we're dying a sort of soul death. And so we seek companionship, and we have relationships to support life and being. We eat food to support life. We go to the gym to presumably support life, right? And then there is a place where, okay, life is basically supported. I've paid my bills, so to speak, or at least I've earned enough to stay alive in whatever doing I'm talking about. And then, but that doesn't mean I should stop. Sometimes there's a whole other level that I go to that's about enriching life or being. Maybe I'm a scientist, and I clocked my 9 hours today, and I earned my paycheck, and I've done the doing that supported life or being based on the requirements of the job. But man, I'm working on solving a really interesting problem. I got an experiment going, and I think I'm going to stay an extra hour and wrap this up because I'm really excited to see how it goes as a scientist, right? That would be doing that exceeded what was required for supporting life, but went into enriching life. Nobody's going to say, oh, that's bad, you should stop doing that. It's like, maybe this is a really valuable experiment that's going to produce an outcome that benefits a lot of people. That's doing that enriches life. But we all know there's a point in the doing of anything where we're no longer supporting life and we're no longer enriching life. Now we're doing to escape life. We're actually doing so that we don't have to deal with something else in our life, some aspect of our being, something that simply is in our life can be avoided because we do something to distract us or keep our attention away from that distraction or escape. And then there's a point beyond that where we're actually doing real harm to ourselves. And this cascade exists across anything we can conceive of to do. This is why they say things like, moderation in all things. What does that really mean? Moderation in all things? What it's really saying is only do things to the level that they support and enrich life. And then don't go beyond that. That's what moderation in all things means. And so if we really look at why we do, how much we do of anything that we do, it exists across this spectrum that we talked about of supporting life, enriching life, escaping life, and harming life. And so what we have visualized here is this minimal discomfort baseline. Now, simply having awareness equals a certain amount of discomfort. Let's call it the random itch, or not loving the temperature, or the fact that my pants leg is slightly hiked up on one side and I'm aware of it. I mean, now you can do mindfulness practice and meditation and sort of spiritual work to try to drive discomfort to zero and achieve enlightenment or whatever. But like generally, there's this sort of baseline. It's minimal discomfort. I'm okay enough to just be, right? I'm not trying to there's nothing that I'm activated to do something to get away from, right? And that's what we mean by the minimal discomfort baseline. So as long as I'm at the minimal discomfort baseline in my life, then I will naturally do to support life because I want to stay alive, because being is fulfilling. And I want to enrich life because being is fulfilling and I want to enrich it. But then I would stop unless there was a reason to keep doing into the escape zone and even the harm zone. And the reason to keep going, i.e. the volume of doing, which as it says here is the total amount of behaviors and substances we fill our life with. The reason we would keep going beyond this line would be because of discomfort in simply being. Now, discomfort of being comes from a few things, and this is not an exhaustive list, but this kind of generally sums it up. Unprocessed negative emotion, unhealed trauma, unresolved conflicts with others in interpersonal relationships, and then what we call design misalignment, which I referenced earlier. It's misalignment between the design of the life and the design of the living, or the design of the organism that has to live the life. And this is why we do this inquiry into design from both the etiological and teleological angle, because if we can understand our design, then we can design our life to align with it and feel fulfilled. And then we won't have this, well, discomfort of being is another subject, but like theoretically, right? Then we'll just do as much as we need to support being. But because of that pain, that pain that starts at a young age, that is one of the initial impetuses to do, and then these things start to accumulate over the course of our life, we all experience, unless we've done a lot of work to resolve it probably as adults, we all experience more than just the minimal baseline of discomfort, which means we have some excess of discomfort in our life, which pushes us to do more than just support and enrich life, right? So that begs a question then. How do we know when we're doing too much? How do we know when our doing is being motivated by supporting life versus enriching life versus escaping life versus harming life, right? And there's a saying that it's hard to see the mountain when you're standing on it, right? Human beings are wonderfully complex and often contradictory and really, really lacking because of, and this is subjects for multiple other videos, but because of ego, because of, self-preservation instincts, because of, subconscious mind versus conscious mind processing, for a lot of different reasons, it's very, very hard for us to really, really objectively self-regulate or self-assess. Like we typically are not the best judges of our own actions. This is why we hire therapists, or we enlist doctors, or we hire coaches, or we listen to wise elders or loved ones, right? We seek counsel from others because we are not the best objective judge of ourselves. So if we want to know when we're doing too much, or maybe another way to say that is, why am I doing what I'm doing? We typically are going to rely on other people to give us feedback. People are going to give us their opinions. And again, subject for another video, but who should we listen to, and when and why should we trust them, right? As I think it was Aristotle said that opinion is the wilderness between knowledge and ignorance, and we kind of have to be careful. But at the end of the day, when we get feedback on our doing, particularly on our doing to any level of excess, it's probably coming directly or indirectly through feedback we're getting from other people or the outside world. So that begs a question then, how do other people evaluate what we do? And I don't think most people think about this when they're evaluating what other people are doing. But if you really think about the feedback we get, it's actually along two different dimensions. There's what we visualize here as the y-axis, which is the value of anything that we're doing to the individual doing it. In other words, if I'm doing something, this is a measure of how valuable is this thing to myself. Value at the top, harm at the bottom. And this is what we call the axis of functionality. Basically, if I'm a high functioning person, I'm doing lots of things that are valuable to myself. If I'm a dysfunctional person, I'm doing lots of things that are harmful to myself, right? And then the x-axis is acceptability versus unacceptability. And this is about value versus harm to society. And those interests are not the same. Sometimes they're aligned, sometimes they're not. But I think it's important when we consider the nature and the intent of our doing and any feedback that we're getting around that to consider, is this feedback around functionality in context of myself, or acceptability in context of others and society as a whole? So we obviously have 4 quadrants here. And what I'm proposing here is that this quadrant, things that are both harmful to the individual and harmful to society, that when society deems a particular form of doing, again, any behavior or substance, to be harmful to both society and the individual, it is considered a classic addiction. And a treatment program likely exists for it, assuming enough people have it in common. Now, if enough people don't have that particular addiction, then maybe we'll see it on that show, My Strange Addictions, but it's still functionally an addiction in the same sense of maybe like a drug or alcohol addiction. There's just, maybe it's less common, right? But notice this dimension of acceptability really doesn't say anything about how much harm or value this thing is doing to ourselves. So the fact that classic addictions are generally clustered as things that are both harmful to the individual and harmful to society means that at some level, this is an oversimplification or a reduction of the concept of addiction. And so what I want to suggest is that I honestly don't even like the term addiction because it's a binary label that something either is or isn't an addiction. But for purposes of this chart, let's just say that if we classify addictions as really anything that we're doing below the midline, i.e. to escape life or do harm to life, i.e. harm to the individual, i.e. dysfunction, then anything below the line could be considered an addiction in this sense, right? Now, if it's drugs or harmful substances, it might be over here, although food is a substance, and I would say food is going to be more probably centered. Actually, I have food on another slide, and food's an interesting one. But like workaholism, totally, I can be doing a really excessive amount of work, doing great harm to myself, and honestly have a lot of people clapping for me or patting me on the back because it's perceived as valuable to society. Now, there actually is Workaholics Anonymous. It's not nearly as commonly talked about as, say, Alcoholics Anonymous, but the recovery industry has awakened to the idea that there are some addictions that are more on the socially acceptable side, but the people themselves are still doing great harm and need help. But at least this is a starting point to broadening our conception of what we really mean when we're talking about addiction. So we're going to keep going here. And what I'm going to suggest is many doings can be valuable or harmful to the individual. And I kind of just said this. The term addiction usually says more about its impact on society than the individual. That's the thing. Like, if you really look at the feedback we get from people, it has as much to do with acceptability, right? Like think about it. If somebody's addicted to pornography versus if somebody's addicted to child pornography, those might be doing the same amount of harm to the individual, although one of them obviously also carries a legal implication, but let's assume abstractly that they're not going to get caught. But we would still judge one to be much more unacceptable, right? Hopefully this video doesn't get banned for that. I may have to beep it out or something. But anyway, you get the idea that feedback on the destructiveness or the harm or the dysfunction of our doing is not entirely clean in the way we receive it, most of us, or from most who give it, because there's this unspoken aspect of social acceptability that's sort of folded into the feedback, but doesn't really get talked about or disclosed. So what I want to suggest is that we should really only think about this for purposes of optimizing our life for fulfillment. We should really think about this primarily in the realm of value versus harm to the individual. And so obviously, the most critically valuable things we do are going to be the things that support our lives, and then also continuing into things that enrich our lives, right? And then the first sort of layer of things that we perhaps might want to stop doing or that are not good for our being are those that escape life, and then the worst is those that harm life. And my proposal is that that's really how we try to think about anything that we do, is where on this cascade is it found. And so now we can start to look at some various doings, things that we do, and realize that where they land on the acceptability versus unacceptability spectrum has a lot to do with how we think about them, even if it's not actually relevant to how valuable versus harmful they are to us. And so work, as an example, is something that we have to take it pretty far into the realm of harm before we're probably going to get feedback of like, dude, you need to back off, because work is so fundamentally valuable to society, right? Food is an interesting one, where doing it at the level that supports life is absolutely considered valuable to society. But as soon as we cross into the level, and then even, let's say, doing it at the level that enriches life, I don't think anybody would say that, 5-star French cuisine that enriches life in an Epicurean sense is as valuable to society as like basic nutrition that keeps children alive, but it's still not considered detrimental or harmful or unacceptable to society. But as soon as we cross into eating to excess, well, now there's a social unacceptability factor, mostly because of the burden it places on the healthcare system or, whatever, other maybe prejudices, people don't like it. But food is really an interesting one because it's slanted depending on whether or not we're doing it, what level of the Doing Cascade we're taking it to. And then I have watching sports. This is an activity, right? A non-acquisition based activity. And I just put it right in the middle, because the reality is I don't think society actually cares that much if people watch sports or not. But I think we can all absolutely recognize that there is an extent to which it could be supportive of life. Maybe if it's part of like a family bonding activity, or recreation for the family, where in order to keep our kids home and from going out and getting in trouble, we have a little, fantasy football draft we do in the family, and we watch the game together, and it's very supportive of life. Or maybe that would be enriching of life. But obviously there's a point where I start to become a deadbeat. I'm disengaging from my family, or I'm just hiding out from life, and I've moved into the realm of escaping or doing harm to life with watching sports. But society doesn't really have an opinion, and there's probably never going to be a 12-step program for people to watch too much sports. Shopping, I moved shopping slightly to the side of good, because at least in the West, we live in a consumer-based economy, and it's generally considered, think of like slogans like support small business. There's a certain sort of nobility in being part of the transactional economy and keeping the money flowing. But obviously it can be done in ways that support life. Buying baby formula, it can be done in ways that are absolutely harmful to life. Spending my paycheck on, lottery tickets, although that might not qualify as shopping, that might qualify as gambling, which is probably its own chart that I didn't create. But anyway, you get the idea, right? The point is to have more of an open, sort of diversified awareness of what we're really talking about here when we look at addiction as a dysfunctional relationship between doing and being. And you can probably tell where I'm going with this, that we can all kind of start to find ourselves in here somewhere. We're going to take that idea further. But first, I want to just pause on this concept of addiction. All right. So the idea of an addiction, I propose, is an oversimplification. Now, etymologically, the word addiction comes from the Latin word for giving oneself over in terms of bondage or slavery, so enslavement. And absolutely, we can identify that there are people that are clearly slaves to a certain habituated doing, right? An activity or a behavior or a substance, right? And we I do agree. There's a line you cross where you've fully become enslaved to a thing, but I think that line is not terribly useful in the sense that it allows most of us, or many of us, when we think about this concept, to exclude ourselves and say, oh, well, I'm on this side of the line, so these ideas don't apply to me. And that's really what this presentation is about, is how addiction science and understanding how what's happening on that side of the true addict line, or the true addiction line in a clinical sense or in a societal sense, how what's happening over there can instruct all of us over here. And that the idea of a hard line is really a fallacy, and that it's much more of a spectrum, right? So to kind of sum all that up, addiction is an oversimplification I'm proposing. They're simply things we do. We all just do things. And as we saw, we started doing things for both positive reasons to support life, support being, and negative reasons to avoid being, or avoid the discomfort of being, right? They're simply things we do. And not all the things we do can be to support, nurture, or enrich, escape, or harm life, our being. Even most narcotics, heroin started as opium, which became morphine. And the whole opioid concept was developed with legitimate uses to support life. That's why drugs were developed, right? I think a more accurate way to think of addiction is by its actual definition, not its historical root, but by this applied definition that says addiction is any substance or behavior that we use on a recurring basis to alter our mood and avoid feeling our full range or intensity of feelings. So I think now that I've said it that way, you probably already know what the next sentence is going to say. In that sense, we all have addictive tendencies or impulses, or think of it as an energy that flows in the body, the energy to distract from discomfort of being. And we manifest that when we do any more of a thing than that amount that supports and enriches life. In other words, when we cross that line, I'm doing to support life, I'm doing to enrich life. As soon as I cross that line into escaping life or distracting life or drawing attention away from life, or especially getting into the level of doing harm to life or being, I'm now in the energy, the addiction energy, right? In the tendency or the impulse that is where that energy takes me in life, right? So we can then theorize that for any doing, anything that we would do, any behavior or substance, there is an optimal amount to do. And it would be the amount that produces the most fulfillment, the most feelings of fulfillment, or actually, I don't really love the word feelings for fulfillment. Again, fulfillment is a state of being, a fulfilled state of being. The amount that is most fulfilling, because it would be the amount that aligns with our design. As we saw in the factors of fulfillment, we're designed to have relationships. We're designed to have social connections. We're designed to do work. We're designed to be in service to others. We're designed to do work and get paid for that work, and so forth, right? So we are designed to do, and we also see data that shows that when we stop doing, we die sooner. So we're not only meant to do, we're meant to keep doing, right? But we should be optimizing the amount of doing in a way that aligns with our design. And theoretically then, we would only do, if we could live life at the minimal discomfort baseline, where there's essentially no externally created discomfort beyond that which is simply a product of existence, then we would stop our doing. This would be the optimal amount of doing, and we would not take it beyond that which supports and enriches life. We would feel no need to escape life. We would feel no need to do harm to life, because as soon as we surpassed this point, we would go, wait, there is discomfort in excess doing, and I want to return to the simple pleasure of being. But conversely, because there is discomfort in being, again, unprocessed negative emotion, unhealed trauma, unresolved conflicts, or misalignment between the life and the living, the design of the living, because there's discomfort here, I choose the lesser discomfort of excess doing. But if I could heal that discomfort, I would no longer have the drive to do any more than that which supports and enriches life across any of these dimensions of doing: work, acquisition of things, relationships, ingestion of substances, or injection of substances even, or activities, right? This is the goal. This is fulfillment. This is the nexus of ultimate fulfillment. If somebody wants to call it enlightenment, fine. I would use a much more practical conception and say that if I can sufficiently heal the discomfort in my being, then I can reach this point where I no longer have excess of doing. And so there's a concept underlying this, right? That there's a homeostatic relationship between excessive doing and discomfort of being. In other words, the total volume of negative doing, and that's any doing that goes beyond supporting and enriching life and crosses into distracting from, or I think we use the word escaping from, or doing harm to life or being. That total volume of negative doing, which would be the total size of the channel of addiction energy, right, is going to directly correlate to the intensity of discomfort in our being. All right, so consider the classic addict, okay? We're gonna have this guy is doing a lot of heroin. And then contrast that with this guy who's doing less heroin, minor heroin use, major heroin use. The theory says that the amount of heroin use will directly correlate to the amount of discomfort in their being, which again, we saw as the amount of unprocessed negative emotion, unhealed trauma, unresolved conflicts, design misalignment between life and the living, and any other sources of discomfort of being, that amount of discomfort is going to correlate to the amount of, or the intensity of, the addictive energy flow and the intensity of whatever it is that we're doing. Now, there's another concept at play here that's really critical for all of us to be able to start to see ourselves through this lens, which is up here. We talk about focal versus distributed addiction energy channeling, right? So both of these are examples, the major heroin use and the minor heroin use, both of these are examples of what we call a focal addiction or focal channeling of addiction, of addictive or addiction energy, in the sense that it's flowing into one particular substance or behavior, in this case, heroin. Now, this person, or maybe it's the same person, but this case is using heroin to offset more extreme discomfort of being then this person, or this case, it could be the same person at two different phases in their life. It's like, oh, Johnny was doing better. He was only using once or twice a week, but then, I don't know, his baby mama burned his house down or something. And now, now he's using every day, right? But it's because the amount of discomfort of being that we're trying to escape is what gets channeled into the relative size of the addictive impulse. But this concept of focal versus distributed is really important, because the reality is virtually no one is entirely focal in the way they channel this energy. Yes, you have people whose lives are enslaved or dominated in a classical addiction sense by an extreme use of one particular behavior or substance, but virtually no one channels all of their addiction energy. And remember, addiction energy is just the energy that comes from the discomfort of being that compels us to do anything to alter our mood on a recurring basis, or alter our mood through any recurring substance or behavior or substance that causes us to feel any less than the full range or intensity of any one or more feelings, right? So virtually no one channels all of that energy into just one thing. The reality is that most people, and I've actually never met anybody that would be singular in this regard, so I'll actually say that all people actually have a distributed style of expressing this energy in their life. And so I have here kind of just a generic case study of a person who's got 4 different types of addictive expressions in their life, or let's just call them addictions for simplicity, that vary in terms of level of acceptability versus unacceptability, vary in terms of level of intensity, in other words, the size of the rectangle, and vary in terms of functionality versus dysfunctionality to the individual. So this person, they drink heavily on the weekends, but only on the weekends. Otherwise, it would probably extend further down and be further that way. But I'm calling this weekend warrior alcohol use. They're also in a relationship which is intrinsically not deemed negative or unacceptable to society, although it's a very toxic relationship, so it's definitely harmful to the individual. But superficially, people are like, oh, he's in a relationship. At least he's not single, right? So there's still considered some acceptability in a social sense, even though it's terrible for the person. This person, while he or she, I shouldn't be sexist, I shouldn't just assume it's a he or she is drinking on the weekends, is basically watching sports all weekend, which starts as something that, again, could be enriching to life, perhaps, but this person has taken it into the level of escaping life and even doing harm to life, neglecting other responsibilities, alienate. It's one of the reasons the relationship is so toxic, is because the other person is always so frustrated because they're always watching sports and drunk on the weekends, right? You get it. And then work during the week, when they're not blowing off steam doing that, they're over here working to excess during the week, right? So this was just a hypothetical I made up, but this is an example of a distributed channeling of this addiction energy or impulse to, again, do things on a recurring basis that alter our mood for the purpose of numbing or not fully feeling either a range or an intensity of a feeling. So that's it. I guess at this point, what I would say is I invite you to put down any resistance or defensiveness that the word addiction might produce, or even any negative associations, and sort of humbly surrender into the reality of being a human being, that we all have discomfort, we all have pain, we've all sort of piled up 1,000 tiny cuts in our life, and some of us have some big slashes on top of that. And as a result, we have uncomfortable feelings, unprocessed negative emotions, unresolved traumas, conflict in relationships, misalignment in the design of our life between the design of our organism. We all have these things. And to the extent that we do, we all use some amount of excessive doing that goes beyond supporting and enriching life in order to either escape from the discomfort of being, or even when you cross into doing harm to the being, what you're actually trying to do is not just escape from the discomfort of being, you're actually trying to destroy the discomfort of being by destroying the being itself. That's what happens when we cross over into harm. And maybe some of us only escape, maybe some of us go to the level of harm. I think we all do it in a distributed fashion. We all do it to varying degrees of intensities. We all do it across all, or at least some, if not all, of these 5 different types of doing. And we all stand to gain from really, really thoughtfully looking at our life and trying to optimize our relationship between doing and being. That is ultimately what, when I said, what do all of us have to learn from addiction science about fulfillment? That's what it is. It's that fulfillment is going to come from the optimization of the relationship or the ratio between our doing and our being, and understanding the intentions underneath why we do the things, and then trying to optimize them so that we're only doing things to support and enrich life. And then we'll talk about what that forces if we can sort of build that as a discipline or a practice into our life. So at ENTRE, we're known as the life design company, and this is by no means a sales pitch for ENTRE, because all of this is stuff you can apply even if you never go any further or look into ENTRE. But what we do is called life design, and that's why I introduce the term. This is our concept for aligning our lives, which is all of our doings. And all of our doings exist across the physical, personal, or professional dimensions of life. We call those the 3 Ps. And that if we can align our lives practically with our design, which we call the 4th P of purpose, it's just what was the intended purpose of whatever designed us for designing us the way it designed us, then, and we can align our lives with it, then we can experience fulfillment because we're fulfilling our purpose. And that's the essence of life design. It's this very practical kind of science / set of life frameworks to do just that. And when we design a life that matches how we are designed to live, our impulse to do more, decreases to the optimal level, which is that level which supports and enriches life and no more, right? And what we have found, we've been in business for, at the time I'm shooting this, 6 years, and we've worked with tens of thousands of people, is that all these goals people are chasing, whether it's a fit body or having enough money to be happy and create more of that optionality in our life, or thriving relationships, whatever, all of those things that typically we strive for by what? By more doing. Well, I'm gonna do more. I'm gonna attend a boot camp to get a fitter body. I'm already maxed out and stressed out, but that's okay. I'm gonna cram in a boot camp and do more to get fitter. Or you know what? I'm gonna get a second job. I don't know when I'll find the time, but I know I need more money. So in order to get enough money to be happy, I'm gonna do even more. Or I'm gonna pick up a double shift at work or whatever. I'm gonna join a dating app, and I don't know when I'm gonna date, but I know that I'm lonely and I'll be happy if I, whatever. Like, we try to cram in more doing in order to go after these goals. And what we find is that when we take this approach about aligning our lives with our sense of purpose based on what we can know about our design, that all these things start to happen naturally when our life is aligned with our design, because we naturally, then we don't, instead of trying to get there by doing more, we actually end up getting there by doing less, because we naturally only do things at that point that will support and enrich our being. And a lot of stuff falls away. There's things we do that not only would we do less of if we were more fulfilled, we wouldn't even be doing them anymore at all, right? We see this over and over again with our members. Bad habits fall away, impulses get under control, decision-making improves, life harmonizes, everything just naturally starts to lift. So my call to you for watching this video, which, obviously you're welcome to check out ENTRE, we would love that. But that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is to challenge you to apply this idea to your life, this big idea, this idea that the ratio of doing to being, which addiction is simply an imbalance in that ratio, and that in that sense we're all addicts because none of us have a perfect balance in that ratio, and that that big idea is an opportunity for you to do a really, really ruthless inventory of your life and to plot your doing. Recreate this diagram, take a picture of it, print the screen, whatever. And then look at your life, look at the work you do, look at everything you do to acquire things, look at all the relationships in your life, look at anything that you consume, and look at anything else that you do that isn't about acquisition of things, and plot it on this graph in terms of its acceptability versus unacceptability in society, but most importantly, where is it in terms of its value versus harm to the individual? And really be honest with yourself. Make the rectangles relatively sized, or you can use circles if you want, but size them based on the intensity or the volume of that thing that you do, but really, really try to place it in its right place and plot all the doing in your life. This can be one of the most valuable, give it 30 minutes, like really go deep with it. This could be one of the most valuable half hours of your entire life. And then the final thing that I'll leave you with is actually a challenge, that after you do this, you find anything that's crossed below this line and you say, okay, I'm going to pull back on my doing. I'm going to pull back on my doing, any amount of doing that is doing harm, like I'm trying to destroy my being because my being is uncomfortable and I can destroy the discomfort if I destroy the being itself, or even just I'm trying to distract or escape a little bit. Pull it back. Try to pull all your doing back and solve for this inflection point right here, this optimized amount of doing for the purpose of supporting and enriching life. And what's going to happen is when you do that, you're going to no longer be escaping the discomfort, and you're going to no longer be trying to destroy the discomfort. In fact, you're going to allow the discomfort to upswell. You're going to feel it, and you're going to sit with it, and you're going to be challenged by it. And you're going to have an opportunity to say, okay, instead of doing more of these things to try to get away from it or even destroy it altogether, what else could I do to actually process through the negative emotion, to actually heal the trauma once and for all? Trauma is about control. Trauma is about a sudden realization that we thought we had control and we didn't. So maybe that's something we need to heal through. And healing through that usually just means surrendering to it, accepting it, right? Making peace with it, radical self-acceptance. Maybe there's some conflicts that I need to actually resolve and set once and for all. Or perhaps there's relationships that I need to exit altogether because they're so intractably conflicted. And then this larger exercise of looking at our life physically, personally, and professionally to align it with our sense of purpose as we understand, or at least based on what we can observe about our design. This optimization exercise to pull our doing back to here will force all the discomfort of being back up to the surface and challenge us to do different things, temporary things, that if they're the right things, eventually resolve or reduce the discomfort of being, and then we don't even have to keep doing those things. We can actually be healing and eventually pursuing a life where all of our doing just lives right here. And the rest is a totally satisfying and fulfilling state of being. This is what all addiction treatment programs are doing, but it is to our own detriment if we exclude ourselves from this opportunity because we say, I'm not an addict. In this sense, in this imbalance of doing versus being for reasons of avoiding or eradicating the discomfort of being, we're all addicts. And we all have the same opportunity to optimize our life for this point right here. Thanks for your time.